Okay, so for this part, again, small little piece here. This is a piecewise function. And basically, here's what you're going to do. You have to figure out which piece of the function you're only going to use for this one. So if they give you one thing to plug in, you're only going to get one answer. So you have to figure out which piece to use. Oh, a little too wide there. So anyway, so try that again. Piecewise functions, you have to figure out which piece to use and then plug in the value. Okay, so again, not overly complicated. It's pretty straightforward. We just need to do some problems so you can kind of see what's going on with it, so you can figure out how these pieces and what else you're going to do for this one. The big thing is, it's still a function, so you still only get in functions. You basically, if you give me one number, I give you one number back. So when we're doing these, if they give you one number to plug in, so like if we're doing these questions, this would be like part A. They would tell you to find f of 3. All right, so what you've got to do is this. Question, go for it.
What does it say right there?
Okay. Yeah, I've started adjusting my screen a little bit. New screen recording things, so I've got to play around with it a little bit. Okay, so they tell you to find f of 3. And if this was like the old functions we had, this would be where you would take this number, you would plug it in, and you would work it out, and you'd go from there. But this one has parts and pieces. So with this thing being that it's f of 3, that means that this x is 3. You've got to figure out, okay, where does x equals 3 fit? Is that greater than negative 2? Or is that less than negative 2? So is 3 less than negative 2? Or is 3 greater than or equal to negative 2? Well, everybody good that 3 is greater, right? So it's not this one. So if it fits in this part, that means you've got to use this thing. Now, this is kind of a tricky one because, and this is, I hate to say it's an easy one, but it's also sometimes kind of a hard one. But because the 3 fits into this part of the inequality, the answer for this one is just negative 4. Okay, probably shouldn't have done that in red because now I can't erase that part off, but it'll be okay. Okay, so that would be, if that was the A part, that would be your question. If this is part B, basically the same thing again. Now they're telling you to find f of negative 4. That means you're using the x value of negative 4. And then you're back to the same thing again. So if the x is negative 4, where does it fit? Does it fit in this part or does it fit in that part? So is negative 4 less than or equal to negative 2, or is negative 4 greater than negative 2? Well, yeah, it's not greater than, so it fits here. So since that one fits here, that means you've got to use this equation. So that means now we're going to use the f of x equals x plus 5. Because it fits into this part of the inequality, that means we've got to use this part of the function. So now we're going to plug in negative 4 into this thing. So that means this would be negative 4 plus 5. And if we do negative 4 plus 5, that number would just equal 1. Okay, so it's basically just figuring out which, so they give you basically they're giving you a number, and you have to figure out, all right, which piece of this, and that's why it's a piecewise function, because the function is made up of different pieces. You just got to figure out, based on the number they give to you, where does it fit? Does it fit in this part or this part? And based on which part it is, that's where you're going to plug this thing in. Okay, so for the last one, there's negative 2, and I've written all over this, so it's kind of hard to see. But negative 2. So is negative 2 less than negative 2, or is negative 2 greater than or equal to negative 2? So it's there. So -2 is not less than. And some people are like, well, it's not greater. No, but it is the equal part. So that means that -2 being there, it's going to fit into this one. And again, this one, there's nowhere to plug it in, so this answer is just -4. Okay, and I have scribbled all over that. So let's do, hopefully the next one might be a little bit less there. So see if we make the next one a little less complicated. A little less scribbly, so hopefully it'll look a little bit better. All right, so we've got x equals -2 for this one. Okay, so where does it fit? Is it, so we'll kind of do here. So is -2 less than 1, or is -2 greater than or equal to 1? Because this is what we're checking on it here. -2 definitely less than 1, right? So we're using this part, and since we're using this part on the top, that means we're going to plug it into 2x plus 1. Okay. And so everywhere we've got an x, we're going to replace the x with -2. So it's going to be 2 times -2 plus 1. That's going to be 2 times -2 is -4 plus 1. That should be -3. Okay, and again, for my people that say that you don't like negative numbers, and I hear you because I'm listening. If you get to these functions and if you're okay with plugging stuff in and getting this, you don't have to work it out by hand, because once you're there, so I kind of block it off so you can see it better. If you can take the parentheses and plug it in, so you got that, you can plug that straight in the calculator. So now it's just 2 times -2 plus 1, and you got your -3. Okay, so when you're doing these, and again, you have calculators on every single test that we do. If you're like, the negatives throw me off, that's fine. Let the calculator do the work for you, because it'll get you through a lot of those. The biggest thing is when you plug in these numbers with functions, it's in a parentheses here, so when you plug it back in, just make sure it's in parentheses there as well. Alright, so we got x equals 6. So again, we're figuring out, is 6 less than 1, or is 6 greater than or equal to 1? There we go. Get through all the fluff that's there. Okay, 6 is not less than 1. 6 is definitely greater than 1, so that means we're here. So we're going to use a -2x plus 3. Okay, and everywhere there's an x, we're going to replace that with a 6. So we're going to take out the x, put in a 6, and then the other stuff around it, we're just going to do what it says to do. And again, if you're not a big fan of working with the negatives, let the calculator do it. So now it's -2, parentheses, 6, plus 3. There you go. You got your -9. Okay. And I think the biggest thing that sometimes people make is, like, if they've got this one, they'll take this number and they'll plug it in here, and they'll plug it in here, and they'll give me 2 answers. But for the piecewise functions, if I give you one number to plug in, you've got to tell me just one answer. So, and you're like, well, you gave me 3 numbers. Okay, but we're got one answer for this part, one for this one, got another one for this one over here. So, okay, so one more of these. We've got x equals 1. So again, if we check these two things, we've got 1 less than 1, or 1 is greater than or equal to 1. And we're plugging it back into this box. Well, 1 is not less than 1. It's not greater, but it is equal, so that means we're going on the bottom. So if we're going on the bottom, we got to plug it in here. So we got to use the bottom part of that one, so that's the one we're going to use. Okay, again, everywhere there's an x, take out the x, replace it with a 1. And again, if you don't like the negatives, that is okay. Take the calculator, let the calculator do the work for you. You've got a -2 times 1 plus 3. So that equals 1. Okay, now good news is that if you're doing these, with a test question, it should be like separate questions. I don't think it'll be like 3 pieces like this. It should just be like, one problem, you got to find that one, and then one problem, you find this one, you kind of go from there. So far as where it goes, that one should be a little bit easier because it's just in a different piece of it. Okay, so let's do this. All right, so for number 3, before we do any of the rest of them, go ahead and do that one. See what you come up with the f of -4. See what answer you get, and then we'll check it and see what we've got. And I'll pause this for just a minute, and we'll come back to it. Figuring out where the -4 goes. Is that less than 2 or greater than 2? Well, if it's negative, should be less than, right? So that means we're going to be using the top part up here, so it should be the -2x minus 4. And again, where you've got the -4 here, plug that in for the x. And everything else should go around it. If you check that, that should be 8 minus 4. So the answer would be 4. Okay, so for this one, you got x equals 8. Is 8 less than 2? Nope. 8 is greater than 2, so that means we're going to be using this one. So we're going to be using 4x minus 9. So again, everywhere we've got the x, we're going to replace the x with 8. So that's 4 times 8 minus 9. If we punch that in the calculator, that is 32 minus 9. That should be 23. Okay, and then the last one. We've got that x is equal to 2. So again, 2 is not greater than 2, but because of the bar here, it is equal to 2, so that means we'll be using the top part. So we're going to be using the -2x minus 4. So again, everywhere we got the x, replace the x with a 2. And then work it out. That should be a -4 minus 4. That should be a -8. Oh, can't see that. There we go. Okay, so all these that we're doing, that's all you're going to do. You're just going to figure out which piece it goes into, and whatever piece it fits into, you use that part of the equation that kind of goes with it. The only thing that changed was number 4. Is now instead of just having 2 parts, now you got 3 parts. But you're still kind of doing the same thing for this one. So for this one, we're using the x value of -1. We got to figure out, well, does that fit here, here, or here? So now you got just 3 parts to check. -1 less than -2. So and again, if you think about your number line, -2, -1 would be there. So it's everything less than -2. That's everything out this way. So that -1 should fit in here between -2 and 4. So there it is right there. So we're going to use this part in the middle. So we're going to use the 2x minus 1. So we're going to plug in -1 there. So we got 2 times -1 minus 1. It's -2 minus 1. Should be a -3. Okay, so we got -4. -4 is definitely out here somewhere. That is definitely less than -2. So that means we'd be using the x minus 1. So that's -4 minus 1 should just be -5. Okay, and then x greater than 4, well, again, if you're using x equals 5, 5 is greater than 4, so we'd be using the -3x plus 8. So the 5 goes there. -3 plus 8. So it puts you in -7. Okay, everybody okay with that so far? Does that make sense? All right. Okay, so take a couple more minutes here right before we get to lunch. Go ahead and work those last 2. We'll come back to those in just a second, but go ahead and work those last 2, and then we'll go over the answers just to make sure everybody feels good with them. And if you got this one where you're working with the half, on a calculator, if you don't like the 1/2 that's here, remember, you can change that to 0.5. So if you want to use your calculator, if you want to use that as 0.5x minus 6, if you've got a half, you can use that 0.5 in place of it if you're going through that one there. So. Okay, so the last few problems there. Just checking those last couple ones. So for -4, that one is not less, or sorry, it's not greater than -1, so that one would be less than -1. So that part, it's just we're going to use f of x equals x. So that one's kind of weird because when you plug in -4, that's all it is. So that answer is just -4. It's a little odd that you didn't do anything to it. If it's x is less than or equal to -1, it's just that number. So, all right. So for this one, 0. It's not less than 1. It is greater than -1. So for that one, we would use the -x plus 4. If you do the negative of 0, that doesn't really do anything. That's still just 0 plus 4. So that would just be 4. Okay. And then the last one there. 3. That is greater than -1, so we would use the -x plus 4. And again, as long as you use the parentheses, everything else would go around it. So the 3 would go on the inside, the negative goes out here, the positive 4 goes there. If we check that answer, that would just be a 1. All right, now, and this is just a what if, but somebody asked me a question. They were like, well, what if, we were using this part and the answer, let's say that -4 actually fit in this part. If we had this part so it was different. If you had this one that fit in here, just to show you what it would do, which was a great question. They were like, what if that -4 fit in this thing? What would we do? Well, if you put that in parentheses, everything else still goes around it. So you'd have a minus -4, which would make that a positive 4. Plus 4, and then that would have been an 8. So if you do have the negative in front, if you do a double negative, that just makes it a positive. So, it's like two negatives make it a positive, still for that kind of same thing there. But now, that wasn't the answer, but their question was like just a what if of what happened there. Okay, and then the last one. -4, figure out where it fits. It's not greater than 6. It's not between -2 and 6. It is less than -2. So for that one, the answer is just 5. So that's it. There's nowhere to plug it in. The answer is just 5. They asked for f of -10. Same thing. That answer would just be 5. If they asked for f of -100, same thing. That answer would just be 5. So anything that's less than -2, you don't do anything to it. The answer is just 5. Okay, so 8. 8 is greater than 6. So we're going to use the -2x plus 10. Plugging in the 8. It's -16 plus 10, which means that one would be -6. Okay, and then -2, it's right on the border. It is not less than 2. It would fit with this x between less than or equal to -2 part here. So this one would actually fit in the middle. So we're going to do half of x minus 6. And again, if you don't like the fraction for that part, now if you're using a calculator, it's still okay. And for those of you that don't know how to use that with a calculator, we'll just show you real quick. Again, using the one that I've got up there. Clear that out. Hang on. So for that one, where you've got the fraction, let's see if we can make it work here. So we got a half. No, it's not going to work that way. Okay, so if you have that one, let's see what we can do here. So if it's a half times -2, I guess you could just change that to a decimal. Take the 1/2, make it into a decimal, and then you can do that times -2. Oh, hang on. And minus 6. So we get that to be a -7. Okay. So if they give you one like that, you've got to plug it in, and you don't like the fraction part of it, that part, if that was the third, you could just take that to take the 1/3 and change it to a decimal. Take that number, and then you can multiply that by whatever number they give to you. So that's one option that you could do for those. These, you have to kind of work with the fractions a little bit if you're doing something like that. Most of the time, you can just plug it straight in, but occasionally you got to be a little bit careful with it there. Okay, so there's everything for the piecewise, and again, it's just if they give you one number, Figure out where that number fits over here. Whatever part that fits into, you plug that number back into that part of the function, and you work out just that one piece. And again, there's not really a whole lot of steps to it. It's just kind of seeing it and knowing how to do it. So I think once we get that, hopefully everything else should be good.